Bob Weisbord is the chair of the committee, however, he's not feeling he's feeling a little bit under the weather, so asked me to do most of the talking. So I'll chair it, but we'll sort of equally share leading some of the discussions. But to start off with, hi Ed, welcome back. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
Maybe we can have the director of public works. Do you have anything for us today, Ed?
I just wanted to quick follow up on a few events. The Dickens Festival yesterday was a well-attended event. The weather was a little chilly, but I believe it was a good turnout. I will have a post-meeting with Mr. Ridgway and some of the other volunteers to critique the event. Santa at the train station is Sunday the 15th, and Santa at the firehouse is Thursday the 19th.
Okay.
We're looking to have some weather Wednesday morning. We're not quite sure yet what the total accumulations will be. But again, the rule is anytime they're forecasting an inch or more, we have an hour after that commences to move vehicles from the snow parking zones.
This coming Wednesday, it's 2 days?
Correct.
Okay.
We're not sure yet what the forecast is as of this morning. They're still a little ambiguous. We've had some mix-ups with our leaf and yard waste collection over the past week because of the blizzard we saw last Monday. Set the whole trash and yard waste collection into a conundrum. They will be here tomorrow, Tuesday, to make sure any yard waste that was not collected will be done so tomorrow. The final leaf cleanup for this month is the 28th, Saturday the 28th. And we ask any residents who observe leaves in inlets, storm drains to either help clean them out or give us a call to let them know when we have this type of rain event. It definitely helps us manage the stormwater better.
It should probably go into the newsletter, maybe.
Okay.
Call for.
Those were all the items I had, ma'am. Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda are action items for Borough Council at next business meeting. We don't have any items listed on the agenda in that category unless anybody has something that's come up.
Not that I can think of.
Nothing present.
Okay, then we'll move on to information items for discussion. The first item is Windsor Avenue, and I think I will pass it over to Mr. Metrick to discuss what's going on there.
What's going on there? Our traffic engineer, Mann Associates, has provided the borough with an estimate for services to complete an evaluation, a base map, a siting plan, and an improvement plan for Windsor Avenue, and has done it in an a la carte fashion, so you can see what they think those different phases of the evaluation would cost. This memorandum was prepared after council had asked our traffic engineer to look at the issue of traffic flow and traffic patterns and doing a traffic study, a lightweight traffic study of limited number of intersections to figure out what would be the consequences of either changing the direction of flow on Windsor or Haverford Avenues, and how those would affect surrounding roadway networks, because we have certain decisions that kind of cascade and affect one another if we were to choose to make Windsor Avenue a one-way thoroughfare. There are some advantages to making a Windsor Avenue an entire one-way thoroughfare, because then there's less room allocated for vehicular traffic, and more room can be allocated to other users of the streets. And that was something that came out in our meeting towards the beginning of this year, where we essentially talked about these ideas, and the traffic engineer polled the attendees at that meeting to figure out what sorts of outcomes they would prefer from this process. So here we are several months later, and we have an estimate for these services of around $13,000. That budget amount is budgeted for next year, should council want to look at that and engage the traffic engineer to look at that study, which will solve or give us some more information about traffic counts, traffic patterns, and the effects of changing any of those traffic patterns on those counts and those delays at intersections. And Bob, it might help to answer a question you and I have been talking about in terms of the functioning of the Haverford and North Wynwood Avenue intersection close to the tunnel, especially during PM rush hours. He took, John Urick from McMahon took this sort of menu of services a little bit farther to look forward and down the line as to what it would take to take this information and guide the administration and council along a decision-making path to come up with a plan. At the end of that process, you would have a plan, and then it would be up to us to go out and implement it. That would be funded directly, find funding partners. It's really only after you have a clear idea of what it is you want to do that it makes those kinds of partnerships more feasible. You can say, hey, this is what we're up to, we vetted it, we did our public process, we figured out how we want the roadway to look. Hey, stormwater funder, hey, multimodal funding source, do you want to partner with us in this project and contribute to the borough's plan, borough's implementing this plan. So we've already budgeted dollars for stormwater improvements and for paving in this year's capital plan cycle, and it's just going to be a fixture of all of our capital plans and budgets going forwards to continually renew our paving and stormwater infrastructure. And I hope that in spite of the fact that this project has taken longer than maybe we all expected when we started, that you're still enthusiastic about examining roadways and looking at them as opportunities to address multiple problems in one space, the many layered users of the space and the many layers of effects that come out of that space. How well does the space manage stormwater? How safe is it for our kids and our to cross the street and our families? Is it accessible? Is it a safe place to bicycle? Is it connected to local and regional networks? So I hope you can still kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel in this process and project. And recognize that we're at a point right now where we're examining potential outcomes, and we need to do a little more homework and investigation and data collection to inform those decisions that you want to make about the roadway, rather than just try and presume we know how the roadway is functioning. We can examine it with the traffic evaluation that's prescribed in this estimate and make better decisions. So that was really the only thing that we've been offered here. It's not a, hey, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to spend, 13 plus 2 plus 2 plus 6 plus 2, 2,500 to get there. It's to say, you all were looking at you had asked me to look at what the traffic evaluation piece would cost. That's $13,500. We have approximately $25,000 in the traffic engineering budget as it is right now for 2020, so we can cover that expense. Really just a roadmap for us, literally, to get from where we are today to that outcome, which is a plan that we've agreed upon and we've gone through a public process to create, that we can then go out and implement with funding partnerships. So we had gotten this proposal a couple weeks before I gave it to you, because I had gone back and forth with John on emails a few times to talk about and understand it. So you got it very close to a meeting date when John was going to be here. We decided, I almost called you Mappa. Bob and I had discussed the last infrastructure agenda meeting and decided that the Windsor Avenue conversation could be punted out to the, I guess there was the next meeting after that was the last business meeting, the November business meeting. So we had John there to discuss a different item. He was discussing the
Bridge.
Correct, thank you. And we selected Plan B. We've ordered those materials, and as soon as those come in, we can do the project all at once. We'll put it in place. And I thought since he was in the building, you could all have an opportunity to kind of query him on this plan that he's laid out to get us to where we want to be with our thoughts and our vision and our plan for Windsor Avenue. It didn't quite work out that way because we spent a lot of time talking about the bridge, and council people got the memo on a Monday and they didn't have enough time to kind of really sink their teeth into it by Wednesday night. That's fine. That's fine. We can have another conversation with John at your convenience, either in committee or as a workshop. Or really the only reason for bringing this up in this setting is to have just a kind of a more open-ended conversation about what we're looking at and see if it sounds like what you were looking for.
I think there's a lot of general skepticism about hiring, more consultants. The borough hires a lot of consultants, and this might be an example where do we need to hire a consultant for all these services? I had a conversation with Kim about sort of just trying something, trying to do something inexpensive and seeing how it affects, performing an experiment. I was thinking, what would it cost to stripe the parking out, basically, turn that into a bike lane? Don't change anything, just stripe a bike lane in there where the parking is right now on the south side of Windsor Ave, just to see what the effect is there. Because striping is cheap. It doesn't seem like it would. That seems like it would be an inexpensive way to perform, to test and see what would happen. I don't know if that's realistic from a safety point of view or from a liability point of view, but it might be easier to figure out what the effect would be if we just tried it, if it were something feasible. And I realized I should have, I haven't really brought this up. I was just kind of thinking it through as I was walking over here. So I apologize for not, discussing this before. But
Well, that's okay. We've budgeted the money, but we're still
Yeah.
at a choice point with respect to what we want to do next. So I
So
guess.
I just want to say, I think it would be wise to stay committed to the Complete Streets vision that the Public Works Committee had one council ago, or maybe it was at the beginning of this council.
Yeah, and our comprehensive
like
plan.
About over 2 years ago, like 2.5 years ago, and the comprehensive plan, and the idea of really bringing the best stormwater management, multimodal, the best traffic circulation, like the best striping and pedestrian, all of that stuff, bringing it to bear ultimately on every street in Narberth. And my understanding of the concept that 18 months ago was that Windsor was sort of going to be the testing ground for these things, because Windsor's critical in terms of stormwater management, and also because it's people walk to the playground and bike to the playground in the library, and so that's why we were sort of focused on Windsor. I've never been able to conceptually understand how making Windsor as a test street works when the intersection at the tunnel's so broken. And I just can't, every time I use it, I just think about all the data that was collected by the TPD and the traffic planners who designed the circle for us, and all the work the federal government did in studying that intersection, and all the data they collected, showing that the way it's done now is totally broken. And it was broken from day one when they installed the traffic light. And that was the data, all that data and all that evidence Lower Merion ignored because of who they were at that time politically. I think actually Lower Merion are different people now, 4 years later. And I think they might understand the wisdom of having a circle there now. And the federal government had a plan where they said the way to fix North Wynwood Road is to have micro roundabouts at Haverford and at Windsor. And if you have micro roundabouts there, you don't have stop control problems there either. That's not my assessment. That was the federal government telling us. They looked at it and they said this can be done. And in fact, they had these kits that weren't that expensive to do it. But so I still sort of I get the wisdom of doing Windsor Avenue as like a test case for all these, how we do all these issues, but I still don't, we could do Windsor Avenue and we would still be so broken in this
Yeah.
other place, and maybe it doesn't matter.
No, I think that this gets to sort of where things fall into this gap between broad values that we all agree on, right? We want the streets to be safe for pedestrians, accommodate multimodal transportation, we want them to contribute to stormwater management, but we also want adequate parking for, you know, businesses and residents, and so there's always going to be some trade-offs here and there, but we have the basic ideas, and then there's the nitty-gritty, right, where we actually implement. There's this sort of gap in between where somebody has to make decisions about the trade-offs. Otherwise, whoever's implementing is like, okay, you could do it A, B, or C, but which way do you want me to zig or zag? Because only you can decide that. And I think we're in a little bit locked in a circle to some degree with our traffic engineer, where I feel like we're kind of, well, no, you decide. No, you lead a little bit. Over the past year, that's how I felt. Now I see that this proposal is just, for what we've got, the $13,000 is to evaluate Windsor Avenue conversion one-way eastbound, right? So there's like a decision's been made at some point to evaluate that, not one-way westbound, for example, and changing Haverford Avenue to go eastbound, which is like, it seems a little wild, and I'm not saying we should do that, but a complete streets evaluation might very well end up with saying, hey, you know what, this isn't, if you look at the network of roadways overall, maybe when you just look at Windsor Avenue, that seems like the logical thing to do because you're used to the traffic flows around it being a certain way. But if you looked at the network of roadways overall, you might not even really investigate that. So that's where I wonder if we need to step back and say Windsor Avenue might make sense as a proof of concept implementation, as the first street to sort of tackle. But do we need to have a broader conversation about the streets overall that integrates parking? And that's not even said.
I agree.
That's more of a complete streets analysis where we've sort of made some of those choices. Even if, let's just hypothetically say, you mapped out every road in the borough and say, these are the goals and this is the way that it seems like you evaluate it with somebody who has more of a planning orientation, right? At that point, there's something really solid that a traffic engineer can look at and say, well, not so fast. This probably has unforeseen consequences. We need to investigate these things for safety. But they've got like they've got your overall, they've got the overall plan to look at to sort of sink their teeth into. I feel like we maybe haven't given enough direction.
What I hear you saying is that there's kind of like the forest and the trees. The trees, Windsor Avenue is a tree. The forest is like how the whole network of one-way streets and two-way streets works throughout the borough and how those intersections perform. And I don't know that our goal is like that the traffic should flow great, but I think our goal is that pedestrians are safe, that bicyclists can navigate, that hopefully we could integrate the bicycle greenways into our network, that we could have safe, at least safe movement and appropriately slow movement of traffic throughout the borough. Because right now, there's a lot of cut-through traffic that moves too fast and people really residents hate the volume.
Yeah.
But I guess I'd like to hear staff, if it's not putting you guys on the spot too much, talk about the question Michelle's asking. And like sort of, I know that 18 months ago, I don't really know what the history of this is, like why we started with Windsor, would be totally pulling everything off track to go to sort of a larger window, larger view, and then come back to the more micro view. But also, like, we're going to have some changes on Windsor in the next few years because we're going to have an additional apartment building, and there's maybe some new parking patterns may happen. So we don't exactly know, can't exactly anticipate what the parking demands are going to be necessarily.
I guess my concern is more general, that if we're going to spend 5 years and I don't know how many $60,000 planning every street, that limits what we can do. We can't spend that much time and money on any individual street and then expect to work on several streets in the town, right? I mean, it's just budget really. I don't know. This is a really long.
You said 5 years and $60,000. Where'd that come from?
Well, how long is this? This is already, it started 18 months ago.
Make sure everybody
Right, it started
understands.
18 months ago. I'm making up a number. Well, there's 30,000 in a proposal here, right? This proposal, 25? This proposal's 25 and we've already spent some. So what is that number, 40 then? If we enacted everything that was in this proposal? It would be $40,000 in planning and a 3-year process, 3.5-year process? I mean, you know, it's a fairly large project, right? If you include stormwater improvements and, you know, crosswalks and all that, but I don't know. I mean, we can't have that as the model for everything we do. You know, if we're gonna, every time we're gonna pave a street, we're gonna spend 3 years and $40,000 on consultants.
I agree, and that's quite
not
possible
feasible.
that after what I'm trying to suggest is that we more relatively independently, with some capacity to tap into and consult with somebody with some traffic planning experience in order to have some advice, sort of tackle the big question of how we want to implement the parking study in conjunction with how traffic should flow, how the borough should ideally tie into the neighboring, you know, the regional greenways and bicycle, you know, plan, like a broad view that's not implementable in the form that it issues from a largely non-professional group, right? But is kind of a steering document. And then from there, how you implement it. Some pieces of the implementation could be as you suggested, Fred. I think, okay, well, maybe it makes sense for some of these, you know, that's when we bring in the traffic engineer who says, well, you'd be safe enough implementing some of these things on an ad hoc basis as proof of concept before you get down to the point where you're really, like, committing yourself to the money and the time to plan street by street, a permanent, you know, infrastructure and fixtures to see that plan to fruition. I mean, I don't know. It could be a time-consuming, a long-term process, but we don't have to do the streets all at once. As long as we don't do a street and we go, oh, we did that, now it doesn't really fit with this, but we did it, so kind of stuck with it. So we're now going to plan the rest of the things around the thing we spent the money on. I don't know if we're at the point of knowing what the overall product should be, the borough-wide streets program. Does that make sense? You said you wanted to hear from staff, and I do too, because I keep seeing these looks of like approval and no skepticism. I want to hear both.
Yeah.
Could you
I'd
maybe
like to hear all too.
restate the question for me?
It's not really a specific question. I think
Okay.
it's just a discussion about whether
Do you-
we're
do you have any comments on
down
what we've
into
been
the
saying?
details of implementation too early on Windsor, maybe. Phrase it differently though.
Would you like to comment on anything we've said? Basically, yeah,
I'm
I
trying
think we've
to,
said our piece.
yeah, I'm trying to focus and have a productive, forward-moving conversation. Ultimately, you're looking at where we're at now is that we've all agreed on concepts and ideas written in our comp plan, written in what we've been doing. We know what it is we want because we know it when we see it, kind of thing. We've gotten to that point, but we are at a point now where we're trying to actually implement, spend dollars, and make some changes and investigate our problems that we identify and continue patterns that we think work really well. Whenever we seem to talk about streets, everybody seems to really like for example, everyone seems to really like Haverford Avenue downtown, single lane, cars on both sides, different material in the crosswalk with signs, the traffic moves. I never hear anyone complaining too strongly about how we're managing circulation in our downtown. There seems to be enough room for things. It moves at the pace. It's designed, seems to be designed appropriately. While we want to be cognizant of implementing a parking study and a circulation plan and a infrastructure renewal plan and a stormwater management plan across a very large universe of 10 miles of road, it only ever comes to fruition in any moment in a particular place, in a particular thing that you want to do. And they're not all the same, right? Like Haverford Ave kind of works downtown, but Windsor Avenue is nuts. you drive down Windsor Avenue and sometimes it's 2 lanes and sometimes it's 1 lane. And sometimes there's parking on both sides and sometimes it's metered. And sometimes there's different users along the street that also combobulate that pattern. And some of the intersections are stop controlled and some of them aren't. It's a mess.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a mess that we've probably all gotten used to because we've driven on the road so much.
It is.
And I don't think we want to accelerate through traffic and make the cut-throughs easier. We don't really want it to be known that hey, it's an easy pop through the tunnel to get over to Montgomery Ave, going down Windsor, because you can cut over to. I was going to say it used to be Albrecht's, but Albrecht's. That intersection. See, I'm starting to be an old timer. I'm calling it by things that aren't there anymore. So it's a difficult thing to prioritize. I think what I hope you can appreciate is the attempt at managing the more difficult streets to solve. And maybe we it's classic Narberth, like we decided to eat the entree before we had the appetizer. We picked a really complicated, high-volume street that's really kind of odd and messed up, and everybody uses and cares about an awful lot. But I thought that was a good place to start, because what better place to really showcase council's policy that's in the comp plan of implementing complete streets than in a street that we all basically use. We've got a great example of a complete street, at least for a few blocks downtown on Haverford Avenue. Once you get past the bank and everyone hits the accelerator, it becomes less complete. It becomes more of an aircraft carrier launching pad. But so there's an idea, emergent idea and plan in your PRP that talks about a stormwater improvement in that location, because it makes a lot of sense from a pollution reduction perspective. But we're never ever going to do any improvement in isolation of any one of its positive outcomes. We're not just we won't invest money and have this 3-block section of Haverford Avenue just because it treats the stormwater. We'll invest in that because it'll treat the stormwater, but it'll also slow the traffic down. It'll give bike ped users of the street a safer way to transit that area, and it'll do all these other things that we want it to do. And my hope has always been that we'll gain institutional knowledge and facility and expertise in how to implement that and find funding partnerships. And the only way we can do that is with good plans. That does not mean, to Fred's point, that we need to go out and plan a short cul-de-sac in the borough, because it's just simply would be showing up with a sledgehammer to drive a nail. It's an easier solution. Maybe just leaving things as they are and repaving them is the right solution. Putting in street trees, and that's a low tech ease of implementation solution when it comes time to remake those areas of our borough. And what I'd like to also do in the early part of 2020, after the snow melts, is do our pavement assessment that we've budgeted for through our borough engineering fees, so we can get a sense of how the priorities shake out. Which streets are in the worst condition and use the most. Those are the ones that probably should be repaved the soonest. And which streets are in pretty good shape and have very, very low traffic volumes. Well, those can wait. And then we have a priority scale of how to do that. And we can knock some of that easy stuff off quickly. And you'll have a menu that'll tell you, hey, 30% of your streets fall into this low effort implementation field. Maybe a third of them fall into like a medium field where they might need a little bit of examination, a little bit of the park. We might need to pull out the parking study and figure out what we're going to do. Are we going to go out on the street and paint people's driveways and parking areas, like was suggested in the parking study? And we'll just have to develop that knowledge on what's the appropriate methodology of tools to use for each situation. I think Windsor is at the top of the list. Windsor is a very complex, lengthy, complicated, impactful street that has a lot going on it. Not to mention it's one of the major trunk lines of stormwater capture and it's bringing stormwater from basically everything from Grayling over to the creek, and we know that that is not sized appropriately, and that's a tremendous amount of amount of money that we'd have to invest to do that to increase capacity. Maybe that's not the complete right answer in that situation, but this is the situation we're in now. We're dealing with a very complicated street. It's $12,000 we've spent. We haven't spent a ton of money
Okay.
investigating it so far. So to take Fred's initial thought that like, hey, I wrote down some notes. I wrote down Gorilla, the UE, not an OR. Like making changes and testing things out. But what I got out of your comments was that let's approach this with a simpler low-cost methodology and tool that doesn't invest us in further outcomes. Or when we get to that further outcome, it's already pre-burdened with a lot of investment and thought and dollars that's prevented us from addressing the other 9.5 miles of street in the borough.
The piece of it is like, I'm thinking that if we were just to go ahead and do this proposal, that when time for implementation comes, that could be done in stages. It could be done more piecemeal. So like say you reverse the direction of flow, or you establish the direction of flow first, then you create parking, then you introduce multimodal, so that it's like, there has to be a way to sort of peel the onion. To me, one of the elephant in the room that I'm going to talk about is, it's the same issue that came up when we were looking at roundabouts. We had a roundabout design from a traffic engineer that didn't inspire confidence in the council at that time. And then once we had a roundabout design from a traffic engineer that did inspire confidence, there was unanimity about, like, let's do this plan. Let's pay for it. Let's do it. Let's pay for it. Mm-hmm. I wonder if, how often boroughs or municipalities of our size get multiple proposals for say a project of this size, and if that would be like an option, if that's advisable or not advisable.
I think finding another, or getting another offer from another traffic engineer.
Whether or not that's has any merit or not, but it's my sense from just like the sense of talking with other people that that's part of some of the reticence, is the feeling that we're not totally sure that we can land this.
Yeah, but, right, I'm not totally sure that we can't, but not totally sure that we can.
can't.
Like, I think you expressed it really well, somewhat of a lack of confidence, but not a certainty that this is.
And I also just want to say, like, Sean, your whole thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the way you just sort of characterized that whole issue, I think was really helpful to me to see, like, yes, we need to keep moving forward. This is logical in the scheme of how, from comp plan through, I see more through your lens, like as the administrator of the borough, how this makes sense to do next. And so I was kind of getting excited about, that's why I thought, like, oh, I think part of this, part of the issue is this thing of, do we have the right proposal, or not? And it's just, I'm sorry.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, whether it would be appropriate for borough to consider getting other people. I don't know. Is that done? Is it appropriate at this juncture for a borough of our size to do that on a project of this size?
It can be done, yeah.
I mean, I think maybe the hope would be,
What would you hope to get out of it, or why would you want to invest in it? Maybe that's the question.
That is the question, isn't it? That's a good question.
I don't
think it's
know.
a fair
I don't
question.
know. I don't know. It was really just if that is that something that's done? Is that
I think I
is
might.
that commonplace or not? Or, you know.
I think I might be able to get more concrete and say, I think maybe what I would hope to see, maybe if it was a traffic engineer slash planner or somebody like the transportation planners who had a slightly different orientation, who had engineering capacity as well within their firm, that it might be something more along the lines of, look, when I look at this road, these are the things I see. These are the opportunities I really see. I'm not going to talk about signal warrants because that's not something I'm going to recommend at the end of the day anyway. Like here's something you might not have thought of. What about this? I think maybe there's a possibility that somebody would bring some more innovative thinking to the table that would make us all go, wow, this is somebody who really looked at this and saw and had sort of had a vision for how this could work better. But maybe that's an unrealistic hope. I think, am I expressing something that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I think you are.
Yeah, this
I
is-
think
this
we're
is how-
looking for a reality check.
I mean, I think my main concern remains that if we're gonna, I don't want to go through, I would prefer the borough not go through a process like this, for simpler changes, for, if we have ideas about crosswalks or bike lanes or whatever, there should be a way to, I take your point, this is a more complicated process that we're going to be looking for grant funding for like stormwater improvements, and we'll need an engineering analysis for that. So, I see that point, but I also, I think there are some things we can just do as a borough without, as lengthy and as intense a process as this. I would hope, at least.
For example, and one thing I think of is like, why couldn't we just paint sharrows everywhere that the greenway is intended to go? Because sharrows are totally harmless. They don't cause any problem for vehicles.
I think once we get the Greenway proposal, we should definitely.
And then they
look at that.
establish kind of a route for bikes, and it tells people who live on that street and people who drive on that street expect to share the street with bikes. That changes the quality of the neighborhood. That's what I should say, that other communities have reported that the minute you do that, it really begins to change the quality of the neighborhood because you have that kind of, you're normalizing that kind of activity. But
So
is that an example of what you mean? Like,
Yes,
okay.
that would be something that we could do, I think, I would hope, without as much.
So pulling back, Windsor Avenue was not on the action items. It was not in the action items portion. So we're not under pressure to make a decision now. But I would
Yeah.
like to understand what the timeframe for moving forward in your mind is, Sean. What we reasonably need to give back to McMahon in terms of feedback or response, if anything, at this time, or at some point council needs to make a decision about what to do.
Or if there's a particular grant that has a deadline that you're looking at, that you're considering.
Yeah, we're still a ways away from a grant application because we don't have, we haven't defined what it is we're doing to the roadway.
This proposal is pretty much just, it's numbers and it's analysis. It's not,
It's analysis.
there's no design here.
No.
Yeah. This is like going to tell us, like, does it work or not work? Like, or is it likely to work or not work to have a one-way?
Right.
Is that accurate? Yeah. I'd like to see us at least do the next step. I understand that there are people who are concerned that we'll spend more money on consultants without product to implement. That's, I get that. But I also don't see how else do you move forward. Same thing happens in your own home. Like, you think,
Yeah.
oh, I'd really love to redo the basement. And then you get the proposals and you get the price and you're like, it's not going to happen this year. We're not going to redo the basement this year. Or I'd like to, rebuild the attic. Well, you get the proposals and you get some designs and you jettison those because you don't have the money to do it this year. And I think that's kind of what happened with the bioswale. That's happened with the library deck. That happened with a lot of projects over the years, and probably going back to the beginning of time with the borough. There's probably a lot of dreaming and hoping, and then things that get jettisoned because that's what we do. That's what we all do, even within our own homes.
If we're not sure we
So-
want to move forward with
Yeah.
implementing Windsor One Way, we probably don't want to spend $13,000 on, a very detailed engineering analysis.
I'd like to see it move forward personally,
Okay,
myself.
Well, then that's, a decision that we need to make, right? Then
I want to see the end results.
So there,
I mean,
so there should be an action
If this is
item
the way
in
to
the near
do it,
future.
then I'm thinking January meeting potentially. I don't know if we want to discuss this again before council, but I mean, I see no reason why we shouldn't bring this to council
What
to
do you think?
discuss. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, the only
Turn this into
reason
an
not
action
is there's
item?
going to be a new council in 3 weeks, and possibly a completely new, possibly a new infrastructure committee. I don't know. We don't know. I mean, even if it's the three of us, it'll still be new.
Okay.
So there'll only be one new council person, so it's up to you. You're the chair today. You
No,
tell
it's
us.
not up to me, it's up to the entire committee.
We'll ask the question again.
But I think, there's enough
I think we
uncertainty.
can say we're a little conflicted, but we feel like the project is important and we need to discuss it as a full council, right?
I'm good with that.
And discuss moving forward with it.
So you want to bring this to the business meeting for a vote, like to resolve whether we move forward with
On the
with the
18th,
first
I mean.
portion of the
This
plan,
one?
or just bring it to the next workshop meeting for discussion, so we can
I think next
do more of
workshop
what we
for
did.
discussion.
Okay. I think
That would
I
be
think
fine.
that
That's
makes
January.
that makes
Yeah.
sense,
But
and then
that's
we have our
January.
new council.
Well,
so-
but this will probably be busy in
So
December.
that's fine.
I don't know if we have
Okay.
enough time
I
for a
think
full
that's-
discussion.
Is
What
that
do you think?
soon enough?
I'm comfortable with
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
And by then, I think if anybody has maybe any more specific questions that we could, or by John, if there is anything like that, John Urick, can
Yeah.
we do that? Okay, all right, through Sean. All right, so if you have any
I'm
more
just
specific
glad-
questions, then we could.
I'm glad we had this long-winded conversation.
I am too.
apologize to the staff that you had to sit and listen to all this, but it's helpful.
That's what we do.
If we don't talk
okay.
about this, we're never going to make
Yeah.
a decision, but
Yeah.
what time does everyone need to leave by?
Like about an hour. So,
An hour?
I'm probably good till after you guys are.
the
All right,
race.
I have less time than that, maybe 3:15. So we should move on to the next item, incentives for residential and green energy infrastructure, which was
Yeah.
brought to us through the Northern 2050 committee, I think, largely, correct? Some suggestions, a nice document that Fred worked on, and so I'm going to let you summarize it because you wrote
Sure.
this document.
So the deal is that Pennsylvania has a uniform construction code that is a state law, and that supersedes local law. So we can't pass laws about green construction. We can't mandate green construction that is stricter than the Pennsylvania law. We can regulate stormwater, which is kind of a separate issue. So we can mandate stormwater improvements, but we cannot say, okay, you have to have solar panels, you have to do this on your house or whatever. So that's just a tool that's kind of off the table for us. So what some other communities have done is use the permitting process, provided incentives through the permitting process, which is under the control of the municipality. So there's a green point system that's been adopted in several places throughout the state in various forms. I mean, it's pretty much the same scheme. You get like a form when you're performing some new construction. It has some ticky boxes, and you just tick off which of these green building options you are electing to use in your building, and based on that, you get a discount on your building permit from the municipality, up to 50%. And it's a flexible system. You can specify. You can sort of use what other municipalities have already done. You can use their kind of boilerplate language and use their experience to sort of guide. So, I mean, it changes a little bit as different municipalities do it, but that's the basics of the system. The downside is that the permitting money is money the borough needs and uses for its everyday business. So I'm not sure. I think what could be done is to raise the permit cost slightly to offset any discount. Basically, keep the money coming into the borough the same by raising the permit cost a bit, so that with the discounts, the money coming into the borough is about the same. This is not a fundraising tool. The idea is to keep the money that is being taken in by the borough about the same. So buildings that did a better job of green construction would end up seeing lower permitting fees, and buildings that didn't would end up seeing higher permitting fees. And the borough takes a flat percentage of the project costs, or I forget what the borough takes a percentage of the project cost as the permitting fee. So
The federal government, the Department of Environmental Protection has a special program to incentivize solar construction, like solar panels. And Matt and I have talked about this, like going back probably more than a year ago. And in their scheme, you would create some kind of, the municipality gets a rating, almost like a LEED rating, gold, silver, bronze, copper, or whatever it is. And already the borough, because we have like a favorable zoning ordinance, if we just had a little blurb about encouraging or helping people understand the context for doing solar and how you apply for a permit, and we even had some kind of special permit for solar, we'd probably be able to get a bronze level rating for that program. The incentives that they suggest have to do with streamlined permitting, which I'm not sure. I was talking with, I think Sean, who said that it might not be legal to to favor one person's permit above another's or something. But I like this idea of looking at ways to create incentives for people to do, to check off the ticky boxes, to do, for best practices, best construction, energy efficient construction practices, or zero carbon neutral or energy production, that kind of thing. So.
No, I think the green points programs are nice. It's the only tool we have, so you kind of.
That's what I found when I was researching this.
I mean, I looked at that. I know, you're right, and it's unfortunate, but it's preempted. So there's kind of two things. There's the zoning incentives that were mentioned in here, where there could be potential to permit to sort of loosen up some zoning restrictions and for where particularly green practices were used. That's something that I think maybe the Planning Commission would be better positioned to look
There's
at.
sort of two separate
The permitting
tracks,
incentives, the
yeah.
permitting fees, the only concern I have, I don't know if the research brought you to this, that there's the municipal planning code that only allows permit fees to be, they have to be reasonable and commensurate with the cost of the services rendered. Now, I don't know.
Wow.
I wasn't able to find anything that ever talked about, and I didn't look real hard, whether or not you can do that as a sort of a permit fee wide sort of balance one against the other, as long as the services for the year,
Yeah, that would be my hope.
Yeah, okay.
So is it
It just
pretty much
can't,
revenue?
it can't be a revenue generator.
Right.
But
I'm not
are
proposing
we
that.
revenue neutral now? Like if the money we get in
So
for
as long as
permits
it
and the
stays that way
engineering
overall,
inspection fees?
somebody can't complain like, look, my permitting fee is higher this year than it would have been last year because you raised it and you sort of gave that to somebody else as a lower in the form of a lower.
It's a John Walker question, I think.
I don't know if anybody looked at
The
that.
principle at play is your individual private decision about what you want to do with your property.
Mhm.
If it imposes cost on the public agency
Right.
that has to regulate that activity,
Mhm.
the public agency can charge you a fee
Mhm.
to cover,
There's a-
to externalize the cost of that thing. That's why we have subdivision land development application fees. We charge
Right, so
they reimburse us for
the
everything.
question being, your services are like $1,200, that's what it costs the borough. I'm just picking a number out of my hat, to review and do these permits, you're actually charging, it would have been $1,200 last year. This year, you're charging me $2,000 because you want to recoup the cost that you gave somebody else at discount below what the services cost them. I don't know if you're allowed to do that on a system-wide
either.
basis, but that would be the
It's
only
a
question, that would be a
question to ask.
question for John. And it's hard to challenge fee. I mean, the burden is on the challenger, and I think it needs to be pretty unreasonable to be a problem, but, I mean, other than that, I think that maybe, so does this committee want to bring this forward at this time and to council and ask council to decide if it wants to ask the planning commission to put that somewhere on their, on their list of things they're looking at? Or
I wonder
zoning
if- I wonder if
incentives
this-
and
I
to
wonder-
ask the office and the solicitor to look at the other piece, or do we want to have council look at that and make a recommendation to move forward or not?
I was thinking that maybe it was the other way around, that we would ask the staff to think about what are the questions, is this a question, are we ready to go to talk with council about this? I thought maybe the
I think council
staff
probably
would,
asked the staff. if they
the other
would
way
look at
around.
it. Right,
Yeah.
but, I mean, this.
Can the committee ask the
I
staff
think,
to look at it?
but this,
What's the right process?
Bob, sorry.
Yeah, Susan.
Sorry.
Excuse me.
So this actually, thinking about this earlier, made me realize that I didn't have a process document that we all agreed on.
Yeah.
And I thought, can we put that somewhere in the SharePoint? Because I wanted to look at it and say, how is this supposed to actually come out? Because
Good call.
it's in the service of something we've agreed on, but it is a new,
My only
Good call.
suggestion about timing would be that if we're, since we're considering a pause on 3-story construction throughout the downtown area, it would be good, if we're going to consider this, that would be an opportune time so that if and when, we restore the, I know that there's a, some discussion over reopening 3-story construction at some point. If we did that and we had this plan in place, that would be nice. I mean, the idea is have this ready before there's new construction actually happening. So
yeah, the
that would make
planning
sense
commission
of
has
time.
certainly thought about this before. It would be like news for them to think about the idea of using,
Yeah.
I think, right, zoning incentives for green
Yeah.
or other things.
That's that track. There's the ordinance level that we want to address it on. There's regulations and fees and like process, and then I guess administrative process. Like there's sort of 3 separate
Right.
things.
But maybe we could talk about it, like, maybe we could take a look at that process document and see how we decided that these kinds of things are really supposed to percolate up to become a request of the office, right?
Unless you can advise us off the top of your head.
I was just looking at that today and I forget, sorry.
I mean, so yeah.
No,
should
the
we-
good point.
So I
Let's
guess
look
the
at it
question
in
is,
the
should we be bringing this to
Right, we'll look at
council
it
to
in
bring
time.
back to you, or should we be, asking you to look at it and then
To
go
bring
up
to
to
council.
council?
We'll look at that
Yeah, see what's
offline before
order.
the council meeting, and then if it's.
Okay.
I did speak to Aaron today just to make sure, he knew this was going on. So I think that was kind of our first step in that process, was whether something's brought up by staff or by council and it's going to affect either your decision-making process or our day-to-day process that we go through the president, and the president sort of says, investigate it in this manner and way. And I think that's where we're at right now in that process.
Okay, great, thanks.
I do have some questions. What, can we articulate the problem this solution is trying to address? What's the,
So the goal is to have the goal is to have new construction incorporate more energy saving and more environmentally appropriate construction during the process, to incentivize them to
not
do these
doing it?
actions.
Did I understand this to be a step in the process of trying to obtain certification under Sustainable Pennsylvania, or was this not?
No, so the deal
I might have
is
misunderstood the memo.
that
I
we
thought that
have,
this was relevant to that.
yeah, so we have, Sustainable Pennsylvania has a whole ton of like things that you can do as separately. So that is, that's kind of separate to the idea of
Okay.
the green points,
Got it.
but
And they're not doing those sorts of above and beyond, like, your ceiling has to be I'm going to make a number, 30. You might
Sure.
have built that.
Ours
the
is
ceiling
way
supposed to-
above that.
The minimum is
I think
pretty
it's over
good.
30 or
Like
something.
new construction's way more
It is.
Sure.
efficient than your old house.
you don't get credit for just doing the standard. You get credit for going above the standard.
So let's have that conversation. So you're at, the code says you got to do R30.
Mhm.
Somebody isn't doing R45 or 50 because the permit fees aren't low enough?
Because it's expensive. I mean, you have to spend money to do it.
Right.
So this is
It's
just a
expensive,
nudge.
Yeah.
This
and
is a nudge.
This is what I can't wrap my head around. Like a $20,000 PV solar array would generate a $650 permit fee. Is that $650 permit fee stopping that person from investing $20,000 if it were $200?
It's an incentive. I mean, there's a cost savings down the line for solar. All of these things, presumably have a cost savings down the line. There's less energy spent. So, it's a nudge. Whether it's enough, if it's not enough, then
I know what you're saying. I mean, it
consider
seems,
it. But I mean, it's also a way for like somebody to take this and say, look, we're going to get a discount if we do this. We'll do that. It's a tool for somebody to push for these kinds of changes? I
I
mean,
sort of say, go whole hog.
which is,
If you want it to happen, then those things cost an awful lot of money. There has to be some way to really address that big upfront capital cost.
for us to address that, I mean, I'm not aware of it. I looked at, this is the reason I looked into this is because I know other people, other municipalities have enacted this, and it's legal in Pennsylvania. I mean, I was not able to find other legislation that had been passed for similar purposes. So this is what I saw.
Yeah, I've seen other fee schedules that have convenient kind of like one stop. Like if you want to do a PV solar array on a residential property, your fee is $200. And yeah, borough will lose a little bit of money because if you're doing a PV solar array, somebody's got to review the plans because you're adding 500, 600, 800 pounds to the roof. That's a safety issue. And then you're reviewing the electrical plans, so somebody's got to review the electrical plans. So now you're at about 2.5 hours of an inspector's time. Gets installed, and then you're at, a visual inspection. So you lose a little money on that discrete job, but it's not about charging the exact price of your services. It's how is the overall venture, do the fees you're charging cover the expenses that you're bringing in for the entire permitting program. But I see that as a kind of like a really easy way to do it.
I guess I'm not seeing what so you're saying waives or reduce certain permitting fees on certain items, specific items? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that could be one way to get at it.
That's part of the SoulSmart process that Bob was referring to, I think.
SoulSmart, it's expedited, so that if you need to do PV solar array, you need a construction permit and you need an electrical permit. SoulSmart recommends like one unified permit, with some kind of flat rate, and then municipalities that have like gold rating just expedite those very like within a day or something. They're really easy to get.
I think that
It's
would be great
kind
as
of
well.
idea.
It seems like, it is a nudge. If somebody has a checklist of things, if they're thinking of putting an addition on their house and when they go to fill out their permit, it's like, it may provoke a conversation or thought, I'd like to get a little bit back on my permit fees and I'll save some, this makes me think I'll save some money on energy too. It could go hand in hand with an outreach or educational program to explain to people how much you might save in heating costs if you opt for the R45 insulation. It's not, but I hear what you're saying, Sean. I agree. It's not an incredibly powerful incentive.
Okay, so
people are probably not going to make their decisions solely based on that, the permit fee relief.
I'm going to propose that we come back to this next month, hopefully with input from staff, and then in this committee, and then try to, whatever that this committee
That's the way to do is to get
Yeah.
more staff input.
Clearly this is going to be something.
infrastructure,
administrative task.
whoever infrastructure may be, take this up in January.
But with respect to the zoning relief, which could be a much bigger impact policy particularly on larger developments, I would like to see if we can get council to ask the planning commission to just put that on their list. I know they have some other tasks that they're looking at. I wouldn't necessarily bump it up above considering the saldo, which I know we need to address, but if it's not already on the radar, I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about.
I think that the trick or problem or speed bump, I've seen this done other places, Westchester Borough. The difficult thing is the sequence of the information. In the subdivision land development process, you're doing site work, you haven't really fully fleshed out the architectural plans. So if you're asking for a zoning incentive, a zoning carrot, based upon parameters you typically aren't solved at that point in the process, like what your insulation rating is going to be and how you're going to heat the place or so forth. Those things are hard to assess at that point in the sequence to get your incentive. But I guess the point being, if you want the incentive, you'll do that work.
Get conditional approval.
Right, exactly.
I think so.
I mean, even the one of the
good
developers was asking, did we have this discounted permit? They're building multi-million dollar projects. I guess they were interested in that. They were hoping they might get a little discount.
Well, it's 3%, right? So
Yeah.
the higher the cost of the thing,
I'm not
the more the permit
totally
fee
in
might-
favor of incentives tied to leadership in energy and environmental design standards either, because those certifications typically aren't conferred until after a certain amount of evidence has been submitted, and that's only done after the building has operated for a while.
like the certification. Certification is really expensive. I would prefer that we didn't have anything to do with, we didn't have any requirements requiring that because that's just, that's a
So there's
long,
some
expensive
municipalities that
process.
struggle where somebody say, oh, yeah, it's going to be platinum certified.
Right, we can do
Yeah,
that.
I don't think we should get involved with
Not,
that.
Knock it
turns
down.
out it's silver
And they
because,
already got the zoning relief.
yeah, and they sent all their building waste to the landfill instead of using it on site.
Well,
Right.
I still think it's possible that we could ask the planning commission to consider it. I mean, they can look
Yeah.
and see how this is played out in places like Westchester. And if there's a reasonable way to administer it and do it, that makes sense. But since we don't have that much more time left, maybe about 10 more minutes, maybe we should move on to the next item, 201 Save on Planning. Again,
Do you want to do the pollution reduction?
oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over pollution reduction. Forgot about it.
Yeah.
Pollution reduction. So we don't have Eric here. We looked at the
Eric's
plan.
in-
National
We
plan.
do have.
I sent answers to the questions.
Okay.
They're lengthy.
Oh, is that the stuff he sent from, is it recent?
Yeah, he
Yeah,
said,
how
follow-
did
one of the first question was, what would be needed to get credit for a bunch of small projects
Oh, yeah,
around the
yeah.
borough, such as residential properties with rain barrels, gardens, etc.
Mhm.
They investigated that. The amount of sediment reduction is very small relative to the amount of work required. Roughly speaking, each installation might get 5 pounds of reduction, so 100 homes would be 500 pounds. That being said, if a program to install small systems across the borough, such as the Lower American Conservancy Stream Smart program, is championed and takes off, and all of the systems are well documented, we could revise the plan down the road to include these systems. It's just hard to quantify at this point.
So if you get 500, you get 10% of your,
Yeah, so
that's
my,
a third of the borough.
yeah. So the current plan, right, is for 3 things. It's for the big underground tank, or big underground, I forget what the term he's using is. Infiltration thing,
Basin.
basin. It's current, well, he said it might not be a basin.
Okay, that's what it
Anyway,
says here.
the infiltration basin under the parking lot here, some sort of, something along Haverford, I forget what the,
Bioretention.
bioretention swale along Haverford, and then the thing on North Wynwood, the more bioretention. So
And
I-
stream restoration.
he's convinced that that technically the infiltration bed will work under the parking lot, or to drain the park area basically.
Uh-huh.
So as long as it'll work, I have no real objection to that. I mean, my objection is I'm not sure it'll work. If he's the expert, he's convinced it'll work, so I think we have to go with that. I still object to the one on North Wynwood because it's much more expensive than everything else. I think it would be great if we could try to find, it's a relatively small amount of reduction. It would be great if we could keep brainstorming and see if we could find something else to deal with that amount of reduction, because it would almost certainly be cheaper. And then the last concern, which is the Haverford strip, is that this may not be relevant, but I know that this has been eyed as a potential bike lane. So if we were to this would extend into the street and narrow the street, and that's viewed as sort of a plus because it would be a traffic calming measure, but it would kind of preclude the possibility of a bike lane there. So we may want to make sure that we're not foreclosing on a future possibility. I don't know if we can move it so that it's actually on the SEPTA land. If we could put something there, or if they're gonna object to it. But basically, if we're doing that, we're foreclosing a potential bike lane. That's the only concern I have there. I mean, I think.
But if there is a way to design it to meet all of those objectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have no objection to the idea. I just wonder if it's if it can be moved a little bit. So those are my points.
Okay.
Just one more
Just
note here about the
Factual
EAs,
question.
about those.
I'm curious, first of all, just a factual, when are we submitting this? Like what,
The thing
This
the thing that's
When
supposed
does this
to,
have to be decided? Whether we're
the thing
doing
that
this?
has to happen next is council has to say, hey, this draft, whatever changes you want to authorize to it is okay. And then, once you say that, and there's a motion passed, it has to go out in the wild for 30 days. Or you receive public comment back at, hopefully, the next business meeting, depending on how it falls on the calendar. It could be you could do that in January, and it might fall in March, just depending, because February is a short month. And we haven't figured out our meeting schedule. And then at that point, you can adopt it, and once it's adopted by council, it gets sent to the DEP and goes into their digestive system, and the 5-year time clock starts ticking. This has already been vetted by DEP and by our engineers, so we don't expect there to be any corrections coming back at us from DEP, where they say, hey, you got to fix A, B, C, and D. This isn't a good plan.
Just have I have a question. I'm getting, in Eric's recent letter, he responds to concerns that the EAC presented to him. And I've also gotten impressions from letters from Jesse that the EAC feels that they're not as involved as they should be with the PRP. So I'm wondering if we could,
That's what I wanted to do.
if the EAC could have a schedule a time with Eric, where just their group could sit down and have the review and query him and make their contributions just in a special session with him. I guess we would have scheduled that with us.
Sorry, I didn't know what the timeline was. I wanted to
Has,
know.
has that,
When we need to
I
get
guess I
this
could
done.
ask Tom Henry because he's here from the
Yes,
EAC.
please.
Like, has the EAC made as many contributions to the PRP as you have, or is there still more work to be done there?
We sent you comments a couple weeks ago on the review of the draft. My email's all screwed up, so I didn't get a copy of those comments. I wrote most of them, so I'm pretty sure I know what's in there. Up until about 2 months ago, we were directly involved with the PRP. We had meetings with Ed and others, the contractor. We took a tour of the borough to see where some options were for putting in some treatment. We've met with Marlboro Park folks a couple times to talk about their participation. That was a good discussion with them. We had talked to the contractor, the consultant about Haverford, about Wynwood, about Marlboro Park, and the underground storage tanks. And we pretty much agreed to all, what's that?
When you say the contractor, who do you mean?
Eric.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
Eric Johnson with Pannoni. He's still a contractor, is that correct?
He's the borough engineer.
What's that?
He's the borough engineer.
Yeah, but he's working on the PRP.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all pretty much agreed with those 4 projects. And I think we made comments. We do have some concerns. One is Park Price Crossing. I'm still not sure unless Eric's gotten back to you all, and I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, I was just going to read you his response, if you'd like to hear it.
Yeah, because I haven't seen anything in a couple months.
So he said he reviewed that letter and that they're currently working to address the concerns, including coordinating with the DEP about price crossing and the baseline year that should be used. And then he said they're updating the PRP with the text edits that you guys offered to them, and that they will continue to review some of the requested language updates with borough staff. So it sounds like he's incorporating
Okay.
the comments.
Okay.
Is there more for you to do with him?
The one big concern I have is the Marlboro Park folks and how involved they are. The PRP indicates them as being a 6,000 pound reduction somewhere around there, almost a quarter of the total. And when I've talked to them, they are interested in the stream, but they're interested in their own way in terms of how they control stormwater runoff and pollution in the stream. My concern is that if this PRP comes out and it indicates that Marlboro Park's a major player and they're not notified of that before the PRP comes out, there's going to be other significant issues with them as well. And I think it's going to take quite a few meetings to get them on board to exactly what we need to have done in the park. They weren't 100% happy with what was done a couple years ago with Conservancy. So they have their own mind and their own way of doing things. So my concern is before the council takes a final action on this thing, someone, and I hope the EAC is included, should sit down with principals in Norbrook Park and talk to them exactly what the PRP is going to show, what their commitments would be. It's a private stream. They don't need to let us in there to do anything. So their communication, their cooperation is really important. And to dump this out in public comment without them knowing about it ahead of time, I think is asking for some issues. The other thing I think should be considered is, and I'll call it training for everybody in Norbrook Park in terms of what needs to be done, how it can be done, how it can make their park better in terms of no mow zone, stream bank restoration, more trees, those types of things. Instead of a blank field that everybody has, they'll have a nice area. I think they need some training in that aspect. And I'm using training on it in it's the only one I can think of right now. But either Conservancy, Delaware Riverkeeper met with them a couple weeks ago, and I went around with them in the park and talked about different options. There's a guy that works for Bartlett Trees. He's got a PhD in civil engineering, environmental engineering. He's got a lot of background on stormwater controls. I think he's talked to Ed, and he's interested in participating somehow in terms of providing his expertise to folks. So this permit's been floating around the PRP for 2 years.
So, Tom,
The state.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I want to make sure that we have time to get to what the meeting is. So for the EACs, what the EAC would like to be involved with respect to the PRP process moving forward at this point, it sounds like there's some issues with Norbrook Park that you believe need to be worked out. Is there anything else? Are there any other inputs?
For the PRP?
Yeah, at this
Well, yeah,
time, or do you think
we
that,
might
has
look at-
Eric addressed most of the EACs?
If possible, we'd like to look at the response that Barry had
Okay.
for our comments. We'd like to look at a revised PRP based on those comments.
So it's not, I didn't hear you, Sean, say there was a deadline by which we had to get this to the DAP at this DEP at this point. So again, is that something where are you okay with maybe facilitating some interface between the EAC directly and Eric?
Yep.
And maybe bringing over a representative of the park into that process before it goes to council for an okay?
Yep.
All right.
I have a general question. So like I said, I have a cost concern about the project on North Wynwood. In your opinion, is there likely to be something else that we can do? Is that likely to be the best option? Or do you think there's something else out
Yeah,
there?
I mean, you've got 4 years for implementation until you violate the permit.
Yeah.
So, and this isn't the last for next 5 years, it's going to be the same thing, probably another 10% reduction. So it's not one thing and you're done. 600 pounds, 300 pounds, if I remember correctly, for North Wynwood. I suggested one out here in front of the library that wouldn't impact the playground, a bioswale out there. I don't think it would impact any plans you would have on Windsor Avenue in terms of making it one way or whatever you want to do. That's certainly an option. I think it's an option from Price Crossing, which I'm not sure really is going to fly because it's operational. I think it's a good option if you can't get the Norbrook folks to cooperate as much as they need to. So, I suggest one out here. I had another one, I think, in the comment letter, but I can't remember that right now. So, that's a small one. But, it's a couple 100 pounds, and right now, walking the borough, thinking about borough property, you don't have a lot of options. You've got Forest, that's already taken into consideration, the new construction. Ricklands is taken into consideration, the new construction. Price, one way or other, is taken into consideration for new construction. And then you've got the four that they suggested. But other than that, the upper parking lot, that was very minor, and it didn't seem like it was going to go. There's not a whole lot. It's built out. There's not a whole lot. You got a property across the tracks, but that's private property. Something had to be worked out. And like I said, it's you've got 4 years left, and you got another 5-year permit after that probably. So it's not only 10% now; it's going to be 10% then. So you look at a lot of things down the road in terms of what needs to be done for stormwater, for PRP, for the sediment control, those types of things. And I just think that these 4 projects or 5 projects probably, and the one out here on Windsor that we suggested, is what you need to look at over the next 4 years. I mean, you're looking at a lot of money, probably, $250,000 for some of these things, but you're probably looking at several $1,000,000 fine if you don't meet your permit limit.
No, yeah, I think we realize we have to do something. It's just
Yeah,
whether-
so, you know, it's, I know you got the bridge, I know you got the permit you gotta do, you got the stormwater problems out here on Windsor that's gotta be corrected, it could be $500,000. There's a lot of money that needs to go out to correct these issues, but you also have to realize that the permit was based on a lawsuit back in 2013, and the state's really not gonna
Okay, thank you.
back up on that, but yeah.
So we'll finish.
I'm going to have to leave, I
Well, I think we
think
should,
we would either adjourn unless you would like to take over.
we should take
chairing.
public comment.
Oh,
Public
sorry,
comment, please.
I cannot
I think there might be
stay.
public
I'll
comment.
continue to chair and do public comment.
Thank you so much.
And
I apologize.
Let's, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for chairing
I apologize.
today, I really
Okay.
appreciate it.
All right,
So,
thank you for coming, Tom, and
thank you, Tom. I think that's a good whole point there, and we have a way forward with the PRP. Let's, 201 Sabine, I don't think there's anything to discuss at this moment, where Sean is interviewing planners, and at some point, the staff will make a recommendation to us for hiring of a planner. The idea is to have the planner be involved in public engagement, and I would say when we have a new council in the new year, we can design with the manager and the planner how the public engagement process would be. And perhaps that means council members doing something upstream of actually the planner coming in. So like some kind of community engagement before. But why don't we just
Yeah, I
have
don't think
that
we're gonna hash that out
conversation.
right now.
Yeah, let's have a conversation in the new year.
But let's make clear that, right now, there are no changes going on. There's nothing going on right now. We are awaiting,
We have no plans.
yes. We are awaiting, we will be performing community engagement before any plans are
Yeah.
proposed.
Few of us on the committee, Sean, were talking about creating kind of a fact sheet that we might be able to provide to the planner, like on day one or ahead of time, and maybe some information about just that can be made public about the direction, including the public engagement, the direction we'd like to see it go in, so that there's a shared expectation of how the neighbors would be involved in the decision-making with the council as we move forward. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think we'll discuss it again
Okay.
in January.
So, do we have public comment? State your name and your address, please.
Kimberly Bezak, 237 Dudley. Speaking as a citizen today. I just wanted to expand a little bit on the point that Fred made earlier when y'all were talking about Windsor redesign. Talking about the striping. So following some of these national trends that are happening right now in the country through our work with the cycling club, one that was really notable to me recently, which I thought was the best example of the bottom-up community approach that we're starting to see more and more of. Traditionally we have what has been happening in this process, which is top-down. And some communities are now rethinking that and doing bottom-up. So I wanted to talk a minute and just bring your attention to this project that happened in New Orleans called Connect the Crescent. And it was a private-public partnership between the local bike group, which is named Bike Easy, and several other community partners, and the city of New Orleans. And they did what Fred was talking about earlier. They took North Peters, I don't know if you're very familiar with New Orleans, but the French Quarter has a lot of traffic problems, has a lot going on, lots of pedestrians. And they took this main thoroughfare in New Orleans that goes through the French Quarter called North Peters. And they gave the local bike group, Bike Easy, permission to do a 3-month temporary pilot. And during those 3 months, they, through fundraising and some public-private partnership, they striped it out and they implemented a protected 2-lane bikeway. They changed up the traffic patterns, changed up the parking dynamics, and over the 3 months, the community members collected data. They looked at traffic speeds, top speed, average speed, number of collisions, number of close calls that were reported, and they did bike counts. And at the end of the 3 months, they synthesized all that data and created a report and shared it with the city of New Orleans. And as a result of that process, the city decided to put money into a full-fledged planning process like we're talking about right now. And now that's going to become a permanent infrastructure project with the complete streets design. But to Fred's point, I really do appreciate, it's very on trend, just the thought of let's stripe something and through lived experience, see how that works. And I think in our community, that's a very right-sized approach to projects. And so I just wanted to take an opportunity to shed some light on that project that happened in a neighborhood in New Orleans. And perhaps it would help inform your discussions as you continue to think about, you know, if the approach we're doing now is the right fit, or if we want to pause and think it through. I do think bringing in community partners and having them be engaged throughout the process is really important. And I would wish for a little more of that with this current process. So that's what I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
My comment is with Windsor Avenue also. Do you have
Your
historic?
name and your address.
Oh, Carol Marie Scanlon, 224 Save. Do you have historic data on traffic studies already performed on Windsor Avenue? I mean, have you compared the difference between the traffic of 1998 study to what's going on now?
We found old traffic studies, yes. I don't know the answer to your question, though.
Okay, but they'll be considered, they'll be looked at to compare the data of the traffic and
If they can be compared, they will be, yeah. Yeah, that's what I don't know yet.
right. I mean, I appreciate.
They're 20 years old.
But it just says the difference between traffic 20 years ago and traffic today. That's something
Quite a bit of difference.
interesting to see what the difference is in traffic patterns, speed, and numbers.
Thank you. Great. Tom Henry, yeah, do you want to just say your name and address?
Yeah, Tom Henry, 231 Conway. I got a comment on Windsor. As you look at it, and you look at parking and traffic, there's 15, during the week, there's at least 15 cars parked along Windsor on each of the free parking blocks. And if you consider removing some of that parking, the only street along Windsor that does not have restricted parking is Conway. So all those cars are going to end up on Conway, which Conway is getting pretty much parked out at this point with folks parking there, as is Stewart with people parking their junk cars and vacation cars and everything. So I'd like you to consider the whole area when you start looking at parking along Windsor and how it impacts Conway, the only street without restricted parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well then, we'll adjourn our meeting now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for